What's going on is Anton from antondaniels.com. I appreciate you guys for continuing to rock with me. I didn't realize that this conversation about food stamps in Section 8 was going to be so triggering for so many people and that y'all was going to get emotional about it. Now, I know that the majority of the people actually seen things my way, and I think that my way is a logical way. Maybe a lot of people that viewed that video, not the majority, but a lot of people tend to look at things a little bit more liberal, right? And I think that a lot of people have some childhood trauma that they need to address before they come into this conversation and then, jump into the conversation and come to the front of the congregation. Because I don't think that most people, let me back up for a minute. We got this thing called the black tax, all right? Anybody that has even a little smidget of success understand what the black tax is. Now, the black tax, for those of you that may not be familiar, is basically it's the guilty tax. It's the burden that a lot of people carry that comes along with being successful in a family that traditionally may only look at success as one way, right? Some people have never, ever left their neighborhood. Some people, their level of success or their idea of success is making $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 because they've never even imagined doing anything more than that. I remember when we were coming up in Detroit, the big thing was to ultimately get into the plant and work for the big three: Ford, Chrysler, GM. You get your A-plan papers. We call it employee pricing now, but you get your A-plan papers. That's what we used to call it. You can get you a Cadillac, a Lincoln. You can rock out, and you could get great benefits. You can work as much overtime, and hopefully you could make over $100,000 a year. That was the dream for a lot of people, to work at the plant. We had no requirement for higher education. We never really thought about STEM. And I'm not talking about me and my family in particular, but I'm talking about the culture. The cultural norm was to ultimately get into the plant, right? And if you ever became super successful, especially if you come from a real degenerate family, then you then have this responsibility to come back and pay homage. We often say, are you ever coming back to the hood? Or you a sellout? Or if you start to elevate your level of speech and all of this stuff, then you talk white. And so we have these stupid fucking conversations about expectations within the community, and we don't even realize that we're still fucking last because we shun the people and the ideas that then break out and is able to articulate themselves to the general public. Then they say, hey, y'all, we on a Democratic plantation. We got it wrong. We may need to look at things a little bit differently. What we thought was real and keeping it real was actually keeping it real stupid. It was keeping us real pregnant and keeping us real on Section 8 and keeping us real dumb and keeping us on food stamps. And that's no way to live, because we are always going to be tied to the federal government with a slave mentality, and we're going to be filling up the prison industrial complex, and we're going to continue to be consumers, and we're never going to really have enough to really break out. But in order for us to do that, we need to get rid of our mindset and stop killing the people and going off on the people that actually have some level of success and they broke out and they're trying to pick you up from the bottom, but instead you got this crabs in the barrel mentality. It's because we let the ones that don't know no better, the ignorant ones, have the loudest voices. And so then often at times what will happen is the person that is successful will give in and they'll dumb themselves down when they're around certain members of their family, or they have to pay the black tax where they basically have to take care of other people or subsidize other people's standard of living, and they don't really get to take off the way that they supposed to because they so busy trying to make sure that everybody else is taken care of. And what I found is that you really can't pour from an empty cup, right? If you don't fill up your cup, you really can't help nobody else. And so you got to be selfish before you get selfless. But more importantly, even when they come back and bring back the information that would allow for you to be able to get yourself out, we reject it. We absolutely, positively reject it. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the real travesty. That is the thing that we really, really don't ever get and don't understand. And we are just like cursed with this burden of consumerism and dummism, and always thinking that just because you black that you are entitled to something. And more importantly, we always say the dumbest things, and it seems like the loudest ones in the room get the most visibility. And why is that? Which brings me back to the this whole conversation when it comes to Section 8 and food stamps and things like that. I would have you to know that the majority of the people that are on food stamps and government assistance are not even black people. And it's not because we're doing better than everybody else. It's just because we so small of a percentage of the population. Never mind the fact that we continue to eliminate ourselves with Planned Parenthood and equal rights and all of that shit. But we're such a small percentage of the population still that we just don't have the numbers. But if you look at it according to the demographic, we're actually a majority when you're talking about per capita for black people versus per capita for any other demographic of people. So the only reason that the white people are beating us out is because it's just way more of us. But it's not because we doing better than them. You understand what I'm saying? And so some people will even use that as an excuse to continue to advocate for it because we always comparing ourselves. We always comparing ourselves to white people. Ain't it crazy that we never compare ourselves to the best of the people? White people aren't even doing the best in society. It's insane. They're not even doing the greatest. But that's our measuring stick because we've been indoctrinated to think a particular way instead of focusing on what actually is the best options for us. And so now you take this false information that they spewing about the fact that you think that Trump is going to pause Section 8 and food stamps and stuff, because again, you have this mentality that even though you have a little bit of success, and what we think is success is not even really success, but you have a little bit of success, right? And even though you have a little bit of success, you still feel some obligation to the hood that ain't did nothing except for cause trauma and cause for you to need therapy and took your homie to jail and made sure your mama was a baby mama. And you just so happen to be the one to break out of the family. You are what they would call the black sheep, but in what we would call the anomaly, because you're actually good, but then they label you a sellout because you then come back and say, hey man, we got to do things differently. We got to think differently. It's not for us to be dusty out here. And so what I realized and looking at the division between that last video when I said first it was false information, but more importantly, people should not aspire to be on Section 8 and take advantage of taxpayers for the rest of their life, but they should aspire to be great and have greatness within them. When I see the division, what I see is a couple different things. The first thing that I see is people have post-traumatic stress when it comes to being divided about being successful. You come from a dusty background. A lot of us do, and it's nothing to be ashamed of, but you shouldn't still celebrate that shit. Listen, just because your mama's still on Section 8 don't mean it's right. Just because your daddy was on Section 8 and they never got married because they never wanted to report to the state that they was living together because they thought that their benefits would be cut in half, don't make it right. Just because your girl is dusty, she got a roach or two running across the floor, and she continue to want to live in squalor even though we have the greatest opportunity in front of us and we're freer than we ever been, it don't make it right. Just because you get free food stamps and you robbing taxpayers, but you actually robbing yourself of the opportunity to be great because you limiting yourself because you think that you actually benefiting, when in reality, this is the exact same thing that we tried to tell you about when you broke up your family in order to subsidize yourself and tie yourself to the federal government in the form of help. And so you broke up your family. This is the same shit. We just doing it differently. It's the same thing. Literally, it's the same thing. And so some people have survivor's remorse. Some people, they take it personal instead of looking at it objectively. For the majority, they can't help but to see it personally. And some people, it actually hit them because they actually are the ones that I'm talking about in some of these videos that live off of it, and they looking at me on their Obama phones and they got the nerve to say something to me when we are the ones that pay the majority of the taxes that then allow for them to live the life that they live. We got to elevate. We got to think differently. We have to, and I'm not even talking to black people in particular. I'm talking about culturally, we need to elevate. We got to do things differently. We got to live differently. We got to see things differently. And success cannot be defined by comparing ourselves to the dustiest amongst us. We need to have a different metric. Even if you're talking about the people that make the most money inside of the United States of America, it's not even white people. It's not. They just running it up and getting the bag, and we don't even know who to compare ourselves to. And so we can comparing ourselves to somebody that's slightly above us, which is so weird to me, because whenever I see all of these white women that then finesse y'all into tying yourselves back into civil rights and feminism just so they can have and be considered a minority, it's funny because they not too much better than us. And so culturally, we got to think differently. We got to move differently. We got to have different expectations for ourselves and for our kids. Think about that shit. If your kid had the same expectations as you and they didn't aspire to be greater than you, that's a problem. That's a problem. Anyways, that's just my thoughts. We can't be dusty. We got to start doing things differently. And it's okay to overwork a little bit so you can have something to pass down to your children outside of this generational trauma that we keep passing on. Let me know what y'all think inside of the chat. I love y'all. I appreciate y'all. Y'all are the greatest audience on earth. And I'm glad that we can have this conversation. I am excited that we can have this conversation. And that even though it may trigger you, it fosters good conversation so that hopefully we can come to a better conclusion on the individual level that allow for us to be able to level up and pass on something to our children. I love you. I appreciate you. I'm going to holler at you later. Peace.